What happens when America's sweetheart sits down for what should be a simple chat about her new movie, only to face a host who seems determined to tear her down? It only took 41 seconds of pure television chaos to watch Stephen Colbert's reputation crumble before our very eyes, as Jennifer Aniston exposed his true colors in the most shocking late-night meltdown ever caught on camera. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, a place where celebrities usually come to laugh, share stories, and promote their latest projects. But on this particular evening, the CBS studio became a battleground. Jennifer Aniston walked onto that stage with her trademark smile, waving to the audience who erupted in applause. She looked radiant in her elegant black dress, completely unaware that she was about to face the most hostile interview of her career. Stephen Colbert sat behind his desk with that familiar grin, the one that usually signals harmless fun and witty banter. But something was different tonight. His eyes held a coldness that the cameras barely caught. As Jennifer settled into the guest chair, adjusting her dress and still smiling at the cheering crowd, Colbert barely acknowledged the audience's enthusiasm. "Jennifer Aniston, everyone," he said flatly, his voice lacking the usual warmth reserved for A-list guests. The applause died down, and an uncomfortable silence filled the studio for just a moment too long. Jennifer's smile flickered slightly, but she maintained her composure like the professional she is. "Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. I'm really excited to be here," Jennifer said, her voice bright and genuine. She clasped her hands together, leaning forward slightly in that natural, engaging way that has made her beloved by millions. But Colbert didn't return her energy. Instead, he shuffled through his note cards with an almost dismissive air. "Yeah, well, let's get right into it," he said, not even looking up at her. "You're here to talk about your new movie, but I have to ask about something else first." The audience sensed the shift. You could feel the tension creeping into the room like a cold draft. Jennifer's eyebrows raised slightly, but she nodded politely. "Of course. What would you like to know?" Colbert finally looked directly at her, and his expression was far from friendly. "I've been doing some research on you, Jennifer, and I have to say, I'm curious about your pattern of relationships. Specifically, how you seem to move from one high-profile romance to another whenever your career needs a boost." The studio went dead silent. Jennifer's face showed genuine shock. Her mouth opened slightly as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure if this was some kind of elaborate joke setup. "I'm sorry, what?" Jennifer asked, her voice steady but clearly taken aback. "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying." Colbert leaned back in his chair with a smug expression. "Oh, come on, Jennifer. Brad Pitt during your friend's peak, Justin Theroux when you needed to reinvent yourself. It's quite the coincidence, don't you think?" Jennifer's professional smile completely disappeared. Her posture straightened, and you could see her jaw tighten slightly. But instead of lashing out, she took a deep breath and responded with remarkable grace. "Stephen, I came here tonight to talk about my work and a film I'm really proud of. I'm not sure why you're choosing to attack my personal life, but I think we should focus on why I'm actually here." The audience began to murmur. Some people shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this interview was taking. But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed emboldened by her diplomatic response. "Attack?" he said with a laugh that had no humor in it. "I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what journalists do? Or are you too used to softball interviews where everyone just tells you how wonderful you are?" Jennifer's eyes flashed, but she maintained her composure. "I've done thousands of interviews over my career, Stephen. I've answered difficult questions about my work, my life, and everything in between. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's just mean-spirited." The tension in the room was now impossible to ignore. Audience members were looking at each other with confused expressions. Some were starting to boo softly, but it wasn't clear if they were booing Colbert or the uncomfortable situation in general. Colbert's producer could be seen in the background making subtle hand gestures, clearly trying to signal him to change direction. But Colbert either didn't notice or didn't care. "Mean-spirited?" he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "Jennifer, you're a public figure. You've made millions of dollars by putting your life in the spotlight. Don't you think the public has a right to know about the patterns in your behavior?" Jennifer leaned forward, her voice remaining calm but carrying a new edge of steel. "Stephen, there's a difference between being a public figure and being treated with basic human dignity. Right now, you're failing at the latter." The audience's murmur grew louder. Someone shouted, "Leave her alone," from the back of the studio. Colbert glanced toward the audience with clear irritation, as if their support for Jennifer was somehow inappropriate. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for doing my job?" Colbert shot back, his mask of professionalism completely slipping away. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle any real scrutiny." Jennifer stood up slightly in her chair, not to leave, but to make her point more emphatically. "Your job is to entertain people and have meaningful conversations with your guests. What you're doing right now is using your platform to be cruel for no reason other than your own entertainment." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Colbert's face reddened slightly, and for the first time since the interview began, he seemed to realize that he was losing control of the situation. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his aggression. "You want to talk about cruel?" Colbert snapped, his voice rising in a way that made several audience members visibly recoil. "How about stringing along millions of fans with this wholesome America's Sweetheart act while your real life is a revolving door of publicity stunts?" The audience gasped audibly. Jennifer's eyes widened in disbelief, but her voice remained steady and controlled. "Stephen, I don't know what's happened to you tonight, but this isn't who you usually are on this show. Your audience doesn't deserve to watch you treat people this way." Her words seemed to hit something deep inside Colbert, but not in a good way. His face contorted with anger, and he slammed his hand down on his desk, making his coffee mug jump. "Don't you dare lecture me about my own show. I've been doing this for years, and I don't need some washed-up sitcom star telling me how to do my job." The studio erupted. Audience members were now openly booing, and several people stood up from their seats. Someone shouted, "This is disgusting," while another voice called out, "Apologize to her." But Colbert seemed oblivious to the crowd's reaction, his attention laser-focused on Jennifer with an intensity that bordered on unhinged. Jennifer took a deep breath, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the chaos erupting around her. When she spoke, her voice cut through the noise with remarkable clarity and strength. "Stephen, I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've worked with hundreds of people, from crew members to directors to fellow actors. And in all that time, I've learned that how someone treats others when they think they have power over them reveals their true character." The words landed like a physical blow. Colbert's face went pale, then flushed red again, almost immediately. The audience began to quiet down, sensing that Jennifer was building towards something important. "Right now," she continued, "you have a platform, you have an audience, and you think that gives you the right to be cruel to someone who came here as your guest? But what you're really showing everyone is that when you have power, you choose to use it to hurt people." Colbert's jaw dropped slightly. For a moment, he seemed genuinely speechless, as if he couldn't believe that his guest was calling him out so directly and effectively, but his shock quickly turned to fury. "How dare you psychoanalyze me on my own show?" he shouted, jumping to his feet. "You don't know anything about me or what I've been through? You sit in your mansion counting your money from Friends reruns while lecturing me about character?" The audience was now in complete uproar. People were standing, shouting at Colbert to stop, and some were even heading for the exits. The show's producer was frantically gesturing from the side of the stage, clearly trying to signal for a commercial break, but Colbert ignored him completely. Jennifer remained seated, her posture straight and dignified despite the chaos swirling around her. "Stephen, I'm not psychoanalyzing you. I'm just responding to the person you're choosing to be right now, and that person is someone who thinks it's acceptable to ambush a guest with personal attacks for entertainment." "Entertainment?" Colbert screamed, his voice cracking slightly. "This isn't entertainment. This is me finally asking the questions that everyone else is too scared to ask. Someone needs to hold you accountable." Jennifer's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like pity. "Accountable for what exactly? Living my life? Making choices that you don't approve of?" "Stephen, you don't get to put me on trial for being human." The simple truth of her words seemed to hit everyone in the studio simultaneously. The audience's boos grew louder, and now they were clearly directed entirely at Colbert. Someone yelled, "She's right," while another voice shouted, "You're out of line." Colbert looked around the studio as if seeing his audience for the first time. Their faces showed disappointment, anger, and confusion. These were people who had come to see a fun talk show, not watch their host verbally assault a beloved actress. But instead of recognizing his mistake, Colbert seemed to interpret their reaction as betrayal. "Oh, so now you're all turning on me too?" he said, addressing the audience with contempt. "Of course you'd side with her. She's Jennifer Aniston. She can do no wrong, right? Well, I'm sorry for trying to have an honest conversation instead of just kissing her feet like everyone else." Jennifer slowly stood up from her chair, not in anger or dramatic fashion, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had reached their limit. "Stephen, an honest conversation requires honesty from both people. What you've been doing tonight isn't honest. It's just mean. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. Even some of the camera operators could be seen shaking their heads at Colbert's behavior. The man who usually commanded respect and admiration from his crew was now the target of their obvious disapproval. Colbert seemed to realize that he had lost not just his audience, but his entire production team. His eyes darted around the studio, taking in the sea of disappointed faces. But instead of backing down, he made the decision that would seal his fate. "You know what, Jennifer?" he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am being mean, but at least I'm being real. Unlike you, with your fake smile and your fake personality and your fake concern for others, at least everyone knows exactly who I am right now." The studio fell completely silent. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy and oppressive, where even breathing seems too loud. Jennifer stared at Colbert for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the studio. "You're absolutely right, Stephen. Everyone does know exactly who you are right now." The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Colbert's face cycled through a range of emotions as the weight of Jennifer's words sank in. He looked around the studio again, seeing the disappointed faces of his audience, his crew, his producers. For a brief moment, it seemed like he might apologize, like he might realize the magnitude of his mistake. But then his expression hardened again. "Well," he said, his voice bitter and defensive, "if that's how you feel about it, maybe you should just leave." The audience gasped collectively. Jennifer tilted her head slightly, a look of genuine sadness crossing her face. "Is that what you want, Stephen? You want to kick off a guest who came here in good faith just because she wouldn't let you bully her?" Colbert crossed his arms, his posture defiant. "I'm not bullying anyone. I'm just tired of pretending that everything is sunshine and rainbows when it's not. If you can't handle real talk, then yeah, maybe you should go." Jennifer nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting this response. "Okay," she said simply. "I'll leave, but I want everyone here to understand what just happened." She turned to face the audience directly, ignoring Colbert completely. "I came here tonight excited to share something I'm passionate about with all of you. I prepared stories. I was ready to laugh and have fun. But instead, I was ambushed by someone who decided that his personal feelings were more important than treating another human being with basic respect." The audience hung on every word. Several people were nodding in agreement, while others looked close to tears. In the control room, you could see the director frantically gesturing, but no one seemed to know how to handle this unprecedented situation. Jennifer continued, her voice growing stronger. "I've been fortunate enough to work in this industry for a long time, and I've learned that there are two kinds of people: those who use whatever power they have to lift others up, and those who use it to tear others down. Tonight, Stephen chose to be the second kind of person." Colbert's face was now bright red. He looked like he wanted to interrupt, but something in Jennifer's demeanor stopped him. Maybe it was the quiet authority in her voice, or maybe it was the realization that anything he said now would only make things worse. "The sad thing is," Jennifer went on, "Stephen is usually better than this. I've watched this show. I've seen him be kind and funny and thoughtful, but tonight he chose to be cruel. And when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them." She picked up her purse from beside her chair and slung it over her shoulder. "I want you all to know that I don't blame you for his behavior. You came here expecting to have a good time, and instead you had to watch something ugly and unnecessary. That's not your fault." The audience began to applaud. It started as scattered clapping from a few people, but quickly grew into thunderous applause that filled the entire studio. People were standing up, some were cheering, and more than a few were wiping away tears. Colbert stood frozen behind his desk, watching his own audience give a standing ovation to the guest he had just tried to humiliate. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. It was as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. Jennifer walked toward the edge of the stage, but then stopped and turned back to face Colbert one last time. "Stephen," she said, her voice carrying across the applauding crowd, "I hope you figure out whatever is making you so angry, because this isn't who you're supposed to be, and deep down, I think you know that." The applause grew even louder. Someone in the audience shouted, "We love you, Jennifer," while another voice called out, "You're a class act." Colbert tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Yeah, well," he said into his microphone, his voice shaky, "don't let the door hit you on the way out." But his words were drowned out by the audience's reaction. This time, the boos were deafening. People were shouting at him to stop, to apologize, to show some decency. The sound was so overwhelming that Colbert actually took a step back from his desk. Jennifer heard his comment, but she didn't respond with anger or hurt. Instead, she just shook her head sadly and continued walking. As she reached the edge of the stage, she turned back to the audience one final time and mouthed, "Thank you," while placing her hand over her heart. The crowd went absolutely wild. The standing ovation continued as she walked off the stage, her head held high despite everything that had just happened. Even some of the camera operators were applauding, their professional objectivity abandoned in the face of what they had just witnessed. Colbert stood alone at his desk, the boos and jeers washing over him like a tidal wave. His hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles were white. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely scared. Okay, he said into his microphone, trying to restore order. But his voice was shaking, and the audience wasn't having it. Let's take a commercial break. But even as he said the words, you could see the chaos continuing in the background. Audience members were filing out of the studio, shaking their heads and talking animatedly among themselves. The few who remained were still booing and expressing their disapproval loudly. In those final moments before the cameras cut away, Colbert looked like a man who had just realized he had destroyed something precious and irreplaceable. His usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by the dawning horror of someone